Are you thinking in Spanish yet? What if I told you there was a tried and true method for thinking like a native Spanish speaker, step by step? If you're still doing the slow, clunky work of translating in your head word by word, it's time to fix that. Let's go over 7 practical steps for training your brain to think in Spanish effortlessly. If you follow this process, you're going to be communicating smoothly and comfortably in Spanish really soon. To dive in, you can go ahead and skip to the 7 steps by clicking ahead in the video, but I do want to give you a heads up. The journey to thinking in Spanish happens basically in 3 phases. Phase 1. For a while, you're going to be thinking in English and translating into Spanish. Being realistic, this is probably going to last several months. Phase 2, for a while you'll actually be thinking in English and Spanish simultaneously. Then eventually, phase 3 is that you'll find that you're simply thinking directly in Spanish. Now the reason that phase 2 happens is because you are going to be translating in your head from English to Spanish for a while. And some people think that's a bad thing, but it's actually okay. My team has coached thousands of English speakers to Spanish fluency, and the most reliable way to do that is to turn your English thoughts into Spanish thoughts and to get faster and faster at that until the translating disappears completely. So if you accept phase 2 as part of the process, you'll actually start to think in Spanish faster. All right, with that in mind, let's dive in and learn these 7 steps. Each of the 7 steps may seem small, but if you follow the process, I guarantee it will work for you. When you run Spanish sentences through this 7-step process, you'll find yourself thinking in Spanish more and more every day. Step 1 is to study one native written Spanish sentence. So yes, we're starting this process with just one sentence at first. Choose a sentence that you find just a little bit challenging. Maybe it uses a difficult verb conjugation, or maybe the sentence structure is just a little bit tricky for you. I recommend finding a sentence that was written by native speakers, not a fake example from a bad textbook. Maybe use a book that was written in Spanish or an online article on a subject that you find interesting. With our coaching students, what we do is our native speaking coaches come up with a custom sentence that's optimized for what our students need at the time. But you can come up with something on your own as long as it's an authentic Spanish sentence written by a native speaker, not an English speaker. So to complete step 1, what you're going to do is simply read this sentence out loud to yourself a couple of times, and then hide it and try to write or speak the sentence from memory. Then look back at the original. And if you got it right, congrats, you've started to learn the sentence. As an example, let's say I'm practicing the sentence, no se lo tienes que dar, which means you don't have to give it to them. So here's what it might look like if I'm practicing this sentence. I cover it up, I write it down, and then I see if I got it right. At this point, if you've just begun to memorize the sentence, great job. Time to go on to step 2. Step 2 is to write a variation on the sentence. So change either the tense, the pronouns, or some other aspect of the sentence that you find challenging. Now, the new sentence should be extremely similar in structure to the original sentence. Usually only 1 or 2 words are going to change. For example, the sentence no se lo tienes que dar might change to no me lo tienen que dar, which means they don't have to give it to me. It's basically the exact same sentence, except that we changed around who's doing what. And that's one of the great things about using grammar-heavy sentences like this one. It doesn't use very many words, but it can be adapted in all kinds of ways, including the ways that you'll actually need to adapt a sentence when you're using it in real life. This sentence structure that you see right here can be slightly modified in thousands of ways once it's second nature. You'll be able to use it to say all kinds of things in everyday Spanish once you're thinking in Spanish. Okay, so now you've written a slight variation on the sentence, and at the end of step 2, if possible, you should send your written sentence to a native speaking friend, relative, or coach for feedback on how you're doing. That's because you do want to make sure that you're practicing correctly. If you're going to make these Spanish sentences second nature, it's really helpful to make sure you're thinking in Spanish the way that native Spanish speakers actually think. Step 3 is to take a break. You might go and study something unrelated, or better yet, go do something active like doing housework or taking a walk around the block. This is actually extremely important to the process. By taking a break from the topic, you're actually going to strengthen it because your brain will start working on it in new ways in the background. Even if you're not actively thinking about Spanish during your break, you just studied a challenging sentence and worked on creating a variation on it, which required a lot of concentration. Now, when you switch to not concentrating, your subconscious mind is going to keep playing with the sentence in the background, which means that that sentence, along with variations on it, are well on their way to becoming natural thoughts in Spanish. For more about why taking breaks can be so effective at helping you learn Spanish faster, check out our video, Learn Spanish Faster by Taking a Walk. Step 4 is to return to the same sentence later the same day. Ideally, do this just before going to bed, because this is going to help solidify it in your mind to help it transition from conscious knowledge to subconscious thinking in Spanish. The way to do this is to once again speak and write the original sentence from memory and see if you got it right, just like you did in step 1. Then write yet another variation on it like you did in step 2. To make this as effective as possible, focus on the parts or aspects of the sentence that are giving you trouble. So here I've chosen to rewrite it as no se lo tiene que decir. So it uses the same structure, but changing the verb dar to the verb decir, since that's going to be really handy in a lot of real-life contexts. This review of the sentence later in the day gives you all the benefits of steps 1 through 3, plus it solidifies them by showing your brain that this type of Spanish structure is something you're going to return to again and again. Step 5 is that the next day you return to the sentence again. Now that you've slept on it, you'll find that once again reciting it from memory, like in step 1, and writing a variation on it, like in step 2, come much more naturally than they did just the previous day. And once again, give special focus to the aspects of the sentence that you find tricky. So for example, this time I've written, no se lo tengo que decir a él, which means I don't have to say it to him. I've added a little bit of complication by putting a redundant indirect object in there, but nothing too far outside of what I'm comfortable with right now. Step 6 is to choose a new sentence to study. Based on what you found challenging while studying that sentence, or anywhere else in your Spanish work, find a new native written Spanish sentence to tackle. So for example, this time I'm going to choose me di cuenta de que no estaban aquí, which means I realized that they weren't here. To complete step 6, you'll actually do steps 1 through 5 again using this new sentence. So my variations here are going to include me doy cuenta de que no están aquí, which changes it to the present tense, and then te diste cuenta de que yo no estaba aquí. All right, after that, choose yet another sentence. Step 7 is to do active repetitions. This is kind of the fun part. So as you continue to accrue more and more challenging sentences, you should practice all of them, and in particular, do what author Barbara Oakley calls active repetitions. This means reviewing the sentences in your mind while doing something active, such as working out, doing housework, or commuting to work. As Oakley describes in her excellent book, A Mind for Numbers, this kind of mental review will help enormously with your ability to internalize what you're learning and make it second nature. That's because, first of all, it solves a problem that many of us have. We tend to think about Spanish only when we're studying it, and then we forget to put any effort in when we're not sitting down and focusing on it. When you make active repetitions a priority, it can help you find more time to work on thinking in Spanish. But also, just as importantly, this practice will help you turn those Spanish sentences into Spanish thoughts that are relevant to real life, because you'll be able to relate the sentences to what you're doing. As an off-the-wall example, let's say that I'm doing laundry and I'm simultaneously rehearsing these two sentences in my mind. No se lo tienes que dar, and me di cuenta de que no estaban aquí. This is kind of fun because I can think of all kinds of ways to use these two sentences to talk about the laundry. And yeah, maybe I'll feel like I'm acting like a crazy person if I'm all by myself saying weird Spanish sentences like se lo tengo que dar a la lavadora or me di cuenta de que la ropa estaba ahí. But just to have some fun with this, what's going to happen while you start to do this is these sentences are quickly going to transfer from just being textbook Spanish that you're studying, and they'll turn into genuine Spanish that you're actually using and thinking in real life. And this will especially be true if you use good, solid, core sentences like these two sentences, which are super versatile. So that's why we start all of our coaching students with lots of grammar, because they end up thinking in Spanish much faster. So those are the 7 steps, and the key is to keep running through all 7, adding 1 sentence at a time. When Barbara Oakley describes this technique in her book A Mind for Numbers, she refers to these units, such as individual Spanish sentences, as chunks. Over time, these chunks are going to build up in your mind, growing together into a strong network of Spanish thoughts that you can apply to just about any situation really quickly, and it'll be second nature. In other words, by following these 7 steps over and over, you'll be thinking in Spanish more and more clearly in more and more situations, 1 step at a time. And as soon as you've tried it, leave a comment on this video and tell me which of the steps you found the hardest. I'd be happy to brainstorm with you on how to make it easier and more fun. Meanwhile, subscribe to this channel for more tried and true study techniques for achieving genuine Spanish fluency.